The rust on my truck's hood had spread like cancer over the past 3 years, eating through the paint in jagged patches that no amount of touch-up could hide. I ran my fingers along the corroded metal as I sat in the parking lot of Henderson Construction, watching my younger brother Marcus climb into his brand-new Ford F-250, gleaming white with chrome detailing that caught the morning sun like diamonds. 16 years. That's how long I'd been bleeding for this company, showing up at 5:30 every morning, staying until the streetlights flickered on, missing birthday parties and school plays and anniversary dinners. 16 years of calloused hands, aching backs, and the bitter taste of sawdust in my throat. And what did I have to show for it? A 2008 Chevy Silverado with more miles than a taxicab and air conditioning that worked about as well as a hand fan in hell. Marcus had been with the company for exactly 18 months. Nice ride, isn't it? Dad's voice made me jump. Richard Henderson stood beside my truck, his weathered face creased into what he probably thought was a paternal smile. At 68, he still carried himself like the construction foreman he'd been before building this empire from concrete and sweat. Figured Marcus needed something reliable for his new position. New position. Senior project manager with a salary that probably doubled what I made as lead site supervisor. The position I'd been angling for since Dad started talking about stepping back 5 years ago. Course your truck's got character, Dad continued, patting the rusted hood like he was consoling a sick dog. Been good to you, hasn't it, Tommy? I wanted to tell him that character didn't keep you warm when the heater died in January. Character didn't impress clients when you rolled up to $1 million job site looking like you'd driven through a junkyard. Instead, I nodded and forced a smile that felt like swallowing glass. Sure has, Dad. He clapped me on the shoulder and walked away. His own truck, a pristine 2023 GMC Sierra, purring to life in the designated parking spot marked Owner. I sat there for another 10 minutes, watching Marcus adjust his rearview mirror and program his GPS, probably heading to another client lunch at some steakhouse downtown. The injustice of it burned in my chest like heartburn, but it wasn't until I got home that evening that the real betrayal revealed itself. Sarah was waiting for me in the kitchen, her laptop open on the counter, face flushed with excitement I hadn't seen in months. "Tommy, you need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward me. It was Henderson Construction's website, the Our Team page I'd helped design last year. Marcus's headshot smiled back at me, professional and confident under a new title, Vice President of Operations. Vice President. When did this happen? My voice came out steady, though my hands were trembling. The announcement went live an hour ago. Honey, I'm so sorry. I know you've been waiting for Dad to retire so I could step up. Yeah. I sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of 16 years settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Vice President of Operations. That's everything. All the client relationships, all the major contracts, all the succession plan. Sarah finished quietly. She was right. Marcus wasn't just getting promoted. He was being groomed to take over the entire company. The company I'd helped build, contract by contract, relationship by relationship, blood drop by blood drop. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept, replaying every moment of the past 16 years. Every time I'd covered for Dad when he was too hungover to show up. Every weekend I'd spent fixing his mistakes, smoothing over his temper with subcontractors, explaining away his casual racism to minority-owned suppliers who wanted nothing more than a fair shake. I'd been his safety net, his cleanup crew, his invisible foundation. And now he was handing my future to Marcus like a graduation gift. But Marcus hadn't earned it through sweat and sacrifice. He'd earned it the way he'd earned everything else in his life, by being born second, after Dad had already learned how to be disappointed by a firstborn son. See, I'd made the mistake of wanting my own life, once upon a time. Fresh out of high school, I'd gotten into State University on an academic scholarship, planned to study engineering and build bridges instead of houses. But Dad's first heart attack changed everything. Mom begged me to stay, to help keep the company afloat while he recovered. Just for a year, she'd said, until he gets back on his feet. That was 17 years ago. Marcus, meanwhile, had been encouraged to explore. College in California, backpacking through Europe, a startup in Austin that failed spectacularly but taught him valuable life lessons. When he finally came home 3 years ago, broke and directionless at 32, Dad welcomed him like the prodigal son. "He's got fresh ideas," Dad would say. A broader perspective. What Marcus had was a business degree and the luxury of failure. What I had was 16 years of keeping Henderson Construction alive through the 2008 recession, the labor shortages, the supply chain disasters, and Dad's increasing tendency to let his emotions drive his business decisions. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that I finally understood the game I'd been playing without knowing the rules. It took me 3 weeks to formulate my plan. The beauty of being invisible for so long was that people forgot you were listening. Dad treated me like part of the furniture during meetings, discussing sensitive information as if I were just another piece of office equipment. Over the years, I'd absorbed every detail of Henderson Construction's operations, the profit margins, the client relationships, the subcontractor networks, the regulatory shortcuts we took to stay competitive. More importantly, I knew where all the bodies were buried. The Riverside Mall project, for instance. 3 years ago, we'd used substandard concrete on the foundation because Dad's golf buddy owned a concrete company that was struggling. We'd covered it up with forged inspection reports and some creative accounting. The mall was still standing, but those foundations wouldn't pass a real inspection if anyone bothered to look. Then there was the Patterson housing development, where we'd violated wetlands regulations and buried the evidence under 18 inches of topsoil. Or the City Hall renovation, where we'd knowingly used lead paint in areas that would be sealed behind drywall, saving thousands in disposal costs. 16 years of cutting corners and bending rules, all documented in emails and reports that I'd filed away, because that's what good lead site supervisors do. They keep records. I spent my evenings in the garage, scanning documents and creating digital copies on a secure drive. Sarah thought I was finally organizing my tool collection. If only she knew I was building a different kind of weapon. The first strike came on a Tuesday morning in March. I arrived at the office early, as usual, and found Marcus in Dad's chair, feet up on the desk, talking loudly on his phone about some weekend golf tournament. The sight of him there, in the chair I'd imagined myself occupying for over a decade, crystallized my resolve. I waited until the morning crew meeting, when all the foremen and supervisors were gathered around the conference table. Dad was running late, probably stuck in traffic after another doctor's appointment he wouldn't admit was about his heart. So Marcus was leading the meeting. "All right, guys," Marcus said, shuffling through papers he clearly hadn't read. "Let's talk about the Morrison project timeline. Tommy, what's our status on the foundation pour?" I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch until everyone was looking at me. "Which foundation are we talking about, Marcus? The one we scheduled for next week? Or the one we already poured with the concrete that didn't meet specifications?" The room went dead quiet. Marcus's face flushed red. "What are you talking about?" "The concrete samples from Morrison. Lab results came back yesterday. Compressive strength is about 20% below code requirements." I pulled out the fabricated report I'd created, a masterpiece of official-looking documentation. "Probably means we need to tear it out and start over. That's about a $250,000 mistake." Of course, there was nothing wrong with the Morrison Foundation, but Marcus didn't know that, and neither did anyone else in the room. The beauty of construction is that most problems don't reveal themselves until it's too late to fix them cheaply. That's impossible," Marcus stammered. I approve that concrete supplier myself. Sure did. Your buddy from college, right? The one who gave us that great deal on materials? I stood up and walked toward the door. Might want to give Dad a call. This is going to affect our insurance premiums for the next 5 years. I left Marcus sitting there, staring at the fake report while the foreman exchanged worried glances. By lunch, the story had spread through the entire crew. By evening, Dad was blowing up my phone with calls I let go to voicemail. The second strike came a week later. I'd been monitoring the company's email server, another privilege of being the invisible man who handled all the IT issues Dad couldn't be bothered with. When I saw Marcus scheduling a lunch meeting with Jennifer Walsh, the city's lead building inspector, I knew it was time for Phase 2. Jennifer and I had history. Not romantic history. I'd been married to Sarah since before I started at Henderson Construction, but professional respect built over years of honest dealings. She knew I didn't cut corners, didn't try to slip substandard work past her inspections, didn't treat her like an obstacle to overcome. So when I called her that Thursday morning and mentioned some concerns about irregularities in recent inspection reports, she listened. I'm not saying anyone's doing anything wrong, I told her, sitting in my truck outside her office. I'm just saying that if someone wanted to double-check the Patterson development paperwork against the environmental impact surveys, they might find some interesting discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies, Tommy? The kind where wetlands boundaries might have been creatively interpreted. The kind where soil samples might not match the locations listed in the reports. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. You know I have to investigate this officially if you're making a formal complaint. I'm not making any complaints. I'm just a concerned employee who thinks the company should maintain its reputation for quality work. The investigation notice arrived at Henderson Construction 3 days later. Dad's face went white when he read it, and Marcus started sweating like he was sitting in a sauna. This is impossible, Dad kept saying. We followed every regulation on Patterson. Every single one. But I knew, and now Jennifer knew, that we hadn't. The wetlands violation alone would result in fines that could cripple a mid-sized construction company. The potential for criminal charges if they found evidence of intentional fraud? That could destroy us entirely. Marcus tried to pin the blame on me during an emergency meeting that Friday. Tommy was the lead supervisor on Patterson, he said, his voice cracking with desperation. If there were regulatory violations, he should have caught them. I did catch them, I replied calmly. I sent 3 emails to Dad about wetlands concerns. Funny thing about emails, they keep timestamps. I pulled out printed copies of the emails I'd sent to Dad 3 years ago, warning him about potential environmental issues. His responses were there too, telling me to stop being such a Boy Scout and focus on getting the job done on schedule. Dad's face went from white to gray. Tommy, I don't remember. Your memory's been slipping lately, hasn't it, Dad? Might be time to let someone with a clearer head take over the company's legal compliance. Marcus shot me a look that could have melted steel, but he was smart enough not to say anything else. The damage was done. The investigation would proceed, the fines would come, and Henderson Construction's reputation would take a hit that might not be recoverable. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The third strike was the most personal. For weeks, I'd been watching Marcus try to manage the company's client relationships, something he was spectacularly bad at. His degree might have taught him management theory, but it hadn't taught him how to handle a pissed-off client whose project was running 3 weeks behind schedule because of weather delays. I'd built relationships with these clients over years of honest communication and problem-solving. They trusted me to give them straight answers and find creative solutions when things went sideways. Marcus treated them like obstacles to his bonuses. So when Robert Castellanos, our biggest commercial client, started complaining about cost overruns on his office complex project, I made sure to be in the right place at the right time. I ran into Robert at Murphy's bar on a Thursday evening, sitting alone at the bar with a whiskey and a scowl. He'd been drinking. Not enough to be drunk, but enough to be honest. "Tommy, thank God," he said when he saw me. "Maybe you can explain to me why your brother thinks he can add 20% to my project cost without any warning." I ordered a beer and settled onto the stool next to him. 20%? That's significant. What's his justification? Material cost increases, he says. Market fluctuations. Bullshit if you ask me. I locked in pricing 6 months ago for exactly this reason. I knew exactly what Marcus was doing. He was padding the budget to cover the potential fines from the Patterson investigation, using client projects as a slush fund to protect the company's cash flow. It was smart short-term thinking and catastrophic long-term strategy. "Bob, can I give you some free advice?" I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. "Get everything in writing. Every change order, every cost justification, every timeline adjustment. And maybe have your lawyers review the original contract terms about pricing protection." Robert's eyes narrowed. "You think he's trying to screw me?" "I think Marcus is inexperienced and possibly desperate. I think you're a smart businessman who should protect his interests." 2 days later, Robert's lawyers sent Henderson Construction a formal demand for contract compliance, threatening legal action if we tried to impose unauthorized cost increases. The letter was copied to the Better Business Bureau and the local contractors licensing board. Dad called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. This time, he looked like he'd aged 10 years over the weekend. "We've got 3 major problems," he said, his voice hoarse. "Environmental violations, client complaints, and now the Morrison Foundation issue has triggered an insurance investigation." Marcus squirmed in his chair. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you've managed to put this company in jeopardy in less than 2 years?" Dad's voice rose to a shout. "Explain how you approved concrete from your college buddy without proper testing? Explain how you thought you could change contract terms without legal review?" "The Morrison concrete was Tommy's responsibility." "The Morrison concrete was your approval." Dad slammed his fist on the table. "Your signature is on the purchase order." I sat quietly, watching the two of them tear each other apart. This was better than I'd hoped. I'd expected to destroy Marcus's credibility gradually, but his own incompetence was accelerating the timeline. "And you?" Dad turned to me, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "Where the hell have you been during all this? You're supposed to be my lead supervisor, my right hand. How did you let things get this bad?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment to drop the final bomb. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the construction yard where my rusted truck sat next to Marcus's gleaming Ford. "You want to know where I've been, Dad?" "I've been right here. Same place I've been for 16 years, watching this company succeed in spite of your decisions, not because of them." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" I turned around to face both of them. "It means I've been covering for you longer than Marcus has been alive in this business. It means every time you cut corners, I found ways to make it work. Every time you made promises we couldn't keep, I figured out how to keep them anyway. Every time you let your ego or your temper or your drinking make decisions, I cleaned up the mess." Dad's mouth fell open. Marcus looked like he was seeing me for the first time. "But somewhere along the way, you forgot that I was the one keeping this company afloat. You started thinking it was running itself. Or maybe that Marcus's fresh perspective was what made us successful. You forgot that every client relationship, every subcontractor agreement, every successful project we've completed in the past 16 years has my fingerprints on it." I walked back to the table and placed my hands flat on the surface, leaning forward. "So when you gave Marcus a promotion I'd earned 10 times over, and a truck that should have been mine, and a future that I'd built with my own hands, I decided to remind you exactly what Thomas Henderson brings to this company." The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Dad's face went through a dozen different emotions: anger, confusion, hurt, and finally something that might have been understanding. "You did this," Marcus whispered. "The Morrison concrete, the environmental investigation, the client complaints. You orchestrated all of it. I documented problems that already existed. I made sure the right people knew about shortcuts you took and promises you couldn't keep. I reminded our clients that they had rights and expectations that weren't being met." I straightened up and looked directly at Dad. "But I didn't create any of these problems. You two did that all by yourselves." Dad sank into his chair like a deflated balloon. "Tommy, I never meant. You never meant for me to feel overlooked? You never meant to give my job to someone with 1/10 of my experience? You never meant to treat me like I was invisible while you groomed your favorite son to take over the company I'd spent 16 years building?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Marcus found his voice first. "So what now? You destroy the company just to prove a point?" "The company isn't destroyed. Yet. But it's wounded. And it's going to need someone who knows how to heal it. Someone who understands every client, every subcontractor, every regulatory requirement. Someone who's been doing the real work while you've been playing executive." I walked toward the door, then paused. "As of today, I'm taking a leave of absence. Paid leave. Call it compensation for all the overtime I never claimed over the years. While I'm gone, you can try to handle the Morrison investigation, the Patterson fines, the Castellanos lawsuit, and all the other problems that are going to surface over the next few months. You can't just abandon the company," Dad said desperately. "I'm not abandoning it. I'm letting you see what it looks like without me. When you're ready to have a conversation about my actual value to Henderson Construction and what that should be worth, give me a call." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. "Oh, and Marcus? You might want to start looking for a good lawyer. When the concrete testing report comes back on Morrison, you're going to need one." The real report, of course, would show that the concrete was fine, but Marcus would spend the next few weeks sweating bullets, thinking his career was over. The psychological torture was almost as satisfying as the practical destruction I'd unleashed on his reputation. I walked out of Henderson Construction for the first time in 16 years without looking back. 3 weeks later, Dad showed up at my house. I was in the garage, actually organizing my tools this time, a therapeutic exercise that helped me think through my next moves. Sarah had been supportive but worried, especially when she realized the extent of what I'd done. "You could have just asked for a raise," she'd said after I explained everything. "A raise wouldn't have fixed the real problem," I'd replied. "The real problem was that they didn't see me as an equal partner in a business I'd helped build. They saw me as hired help." Now Dad stood in my garage doorway, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. The past few weeks had not been kind to Henderson Construction. "The Morrison concrete came back clean," he said without preamble. "I know. The Patterson fines are going to cost us almost $500,000. I know. Robert Castellanos is suing us for breach of contract. I know." Dad stepped into the garage, running his fingers along my workbench like he was examining evidence. "3 other clients have asked for contract reviews. The bonding company is asking questions about our financial stability. Our insurance premiums are going up 40%. I know." He turned to face me. "You really did your homework, didn't you? 16 years of homework." Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at a wrench set I'd organized by size. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I never meant to make you feel invisible." The words hit harder than I'd expected. All the anger, all the planning, all the methodical revenge, none of it had prepared me for the simple acknowledgement I'd been waiting half my life to hear. "But I did," he continued. "I took you for granted. I let Marcus waltz in and take credit for work you'd done, relationships you'd built. I gave him opportunities I should have given you first. I set down the socket wrench I'd been holding and looked at my father. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time since I'd come home from high school. Why? I asked. He leaned against the workbench, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Because you never needed me to believe in you? From the time you were old enough to hold a hammer, you just did things, fixed problems, figured out solutions, made things work. You were so competent, so reliable. I started thinking you didn't need recognition the way other people did. He paused, struggling with words that had probably been building in his chest for months. Marcus always needed encouragement, always needed someone to tell him he was doing good work, even when he wasn't. You never seemed to need that from me, so I gave it all to him. The garage fell silent except for the distant sound of Sarah making dinner in the kitchen. I thought about all the times I'd fixed his mistakes without being asked, solved his problems without expecting credit, kept his company running while he focused on his disappointments. I needed it too, I said quietly. I just didn't know how to ask for it. Dad nodded, his eyes wet. I know that now. Too late, maybe, but I know it. It's not too late. He looked up at me with something that might have been hope. But things are going to change, I continued. If I come back, and I'm not saying I will, it won't be as your invisible safety net. It'll be as a full partner in Henderson Construction, equal ownership, equal decision-making authority, and equal respect. What about Marcus? I'd thought about this question for weeks. The easy answer would be to demand his removal, to complete my revenge by destroying his future the way I felt he'd destroyed mine. But looking at Dad's broken expression, I realized that kind of victory would be hollow. Marcus can stay, but not as vice president. He's not ready for that kind of responsibility, and we both know it. Give him a chance to learn the business from the ground up, the way I did. Maybe in 5 or 10 years, he'll have earned a real leadership position. Dad was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear. 50-50 partnership? 50-50? And Marcus goes back to junior project manager? With appropriate supervision and training. And you'll help us clean up this mess you created? I smiled for the first time in weeks. I'll help us clean up the mess we all created. But Dad? Next time you want to buy someone a truck, maybe we should discuss it first. He laughed, actually laughed, and for a moment, he looked like the father I remembered from childhood, before disappointment and business pressures had hardened him into someone who measured love in different scales for different children. Deal, he said, extending his weathered hand. I shook it, feeling 16 years of resentment finally begin to loosen their grip on my chest. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office, the one with actual windows and a door that closed, reviewing contracts for the Henderson Construction Company. The company name hadn't changed, but the structure had. Henderson and Son had become Henderson and Henderson, with both names carrying equal weight. My truck was newer now, though not as flashy as Marcus's had been. He was driving a sensible used sedan these days, earning his way back up the ladder one successfully completed project at a time. But more importantly, the respect I'd fought for was real and visible in every interaction, every meeting, every decision we made as partners. Sarah stopped by with coffee and a smile that told me she was proud of how I'd handled the aftermath of my revenge. Any regrets? She asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I thought about it as I watched Marcus through my window, working with a crew to solve a drainage problem on the Peterson renovation. He was learning, slowly but genuinely, what it meant to build something with your own hands instead of inheriting it. No regrets about demanding what I was worth, I said finally. Maybe some regrets about the methods I used to get there. But they worked. They worked. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to build better ones. Sarah laughed and kissed my forehead before heading back to her own job, leaving me alone with the contracts and the view of a construction company that finally felt like home. The irony wasn't lost on me that it had taken revenge to teach us all how to be family again. But maybe that's what family really is. People who love each other enough to fight for their place at the table, even when that fight gets ugly and expensive and painful. Dad was right about one thing. I'd done my homework. 16 years of it. And finally, it had paid off.